The basis for our confusion. Chapter 14. Khazaria. From establishment source Wikipedia. The Khazars were a semi-nomadic Turkic people that in the late 6th century established a major commercial empire covering the southeastern section of modern European Russia, southern Ukraine, Crimea, and Kazakhstan. Now first, anyone notice this area as being of major geopolitical importance in our modern day? Almost the epicenter of what the controllers are calling the Great Reset. The conflict, the main players, all from this area or having major interest in this area. The story begins in 70 AD with the sacking of Jerusalem by Rome, resulting in the emigration of many Jews into Europe, mostly Germany or Rhineland. These Jews became known as Ashkenazi Jews. Over the next few centuries, much interbreeding occurs and much of the bloodlines must have been watered down, and it's during this time that many scholars believe that the Khazars come into existence. By the 500s, the Khazars appear in the central steppes of Europe, just north of Rhineland, the home of the Ashkenazi Jews. It appears that the Khazars interbred with the locals in Central and Eastern Europe, interbreeding with some Ashkenazi Jews and some with European non-Jews. In any event, the Khazars begin to carve out their own civilization to be reckoned with, and begin to convert to Judaism by around 750 AD. Now this is important. When we're talking mystery schools and how they infiltrate the major institutions of the day, and no institution was any bigger back during these times than religion. And now with the Khazarian conversion to Judaism, these infiltrators now have their slippery tentacles in all three of the major religions. They took Christianity in the 300s with Constantine, the Arabs in the 500s, the Muslims, which we'll explain, and then they take Judaism in the 700s. All part of the plan, folks. So now they've got a large chunk of land, a whole civilization calling themselves Khazars, and control of the last religion that was not under their control, in Judaism. And so now the stage is set. To dig in, we must go back to a subject spoken about extensively by me, Constantine, and the Council of Nicaea. After Constantine began to consolidate the Roman Empire and Christianity, it seems to have caused some turmoil within the Roman Empire lasting at least 100 years. We see a power vacuum after this mystery school hostile takeover. We see chaos. The Eastern Roman Empire might have been fighting back for Christianity after realizing what Constantine and the fellas were up to. Looks like they began infiltrating via interbreeding with the Ashkenazis in Eastern Europe, which was the Western Roman Empire at the time. And by 450 to 500 AD, they were teaming up with the barbarians in the north, running raids into the Western Roman Empire, thus weakening it and causing its collapse. And immediately following its collapse, Khazarians began to settle to the northeast of the old Western Roman Empire. I suggest that after Nicaea, they didn't take full control. Either the East wasn't fully on board, or maybe the West. In any case, this could be another example of can't beat 'em, join 'em. Or more infiltration was needed, and this was the way to do it. We understand how over the millennia, how they've blown up the current system in order to roll out their new system, just like they did when they transitioned from the divine right to rule, or like how they are getting ready to do now by blowing up our current liberal world order so as to usher in their Hegelian dialect already planned new solution. Whatever the case, this destabilization of the Roman Empire led to its fall and to an almost immediate rise in the Khazars. At this point, did the Khazars finally consolidate through infiltration, full control of the world's main empire, while also maintaining a manufactured world power balance by having the ability to pit the Khazars versus the Romans, just like they've done to us in our lifetimes during the Cold War, pitting US and Russia against each other artificially in order to keep everybody under control? controlling both sides of the conflict in order to keep the fate of the world in their hands, and the stress and the fear and the mind control that comes with it all. From around 500, the Khazars had a decent chunk of land under its control, but were surrounded by Arab enemies. There's battles and skirmishes with these Arabs for over a century, finally culminating in an Arab civil war after the Khazars killed the Muslim general who was the son-in-law of Muhammad the Prophet. Mission complete, folks. Very interesting. Was this more destabilization from a group of snakes that uses destabilization and infiltration and chaos as its MO? Did decimating the Arabs and plunging them into civil war allow the Khazars to do what they do best? Destroy, take control of a now weakened civilization and then build them back up? It's almost like it was all connected. They first, using the Arabs, destabilized the Roman Empire. This allowed for the Arabs to grow stronger, but lo and behold, the rise of the Khazars also directly triggers their destabilization and eventual civil war within the now semi-strong Arab groups. Again, dear listeners, this has mystery school written all over it. It's from this point that the fake Jew Khazars seem to have had a clear lane of hundreds of years to consolidate their power in the region and to prepare for their next step in their plan for world domination. It's during these few centuries that the mystery school Khazars, who are Turks, remember, were able to whip up division between the major religions, of which they now control all three. And now we can clearly see what all of the conflict, chaos, and destabilization had allowed for these Khazars to accomplish. The seizing of all three Abrahamic religions, the goal after all. So began the Crusades, and by the 1400s, the Ottomans or the Turks had taken over the Roman Empire. Now again, we think that these same people, the mystery school agents, had control of Rome, maybe not fully, but majority control of Rome ever since the 4th or 5th century, after the Constantine consolidation was complete. All this chaos and destabilization that was done may have been done in order to keep the masses in stress and fear and chaos, making them easier to control, or maybe it was the result of a power vacuum created by the mystery school agents' destabilization of the Roman Empire. And maybe some good people were fighting back. Or it was being done because it was time to blow it all up and usher in their new way, their new system, what they do best. It appears as though, ever since the Khazars assumed control of this area in Central Europe, in Eurasia, that this area has been the epicenter of geopolitics ever since, up to and including this very moment in time. We can't deny that Ukraine is almost smack dab in the middle of what was known as the Khazarian Empire, and even its leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, is a Khazarian Jew. The main public face and financing of the destabilization of Ukraine can be linked directly to another Khazarian Jew in the Hungarian-born George Soros, who worked for the Nazis in rounding up his supposed fellow Jews to go to the camps. But let's clear this Jewish confusion up once and for all. These people that we speak about in all of my work are master manipulators and infiltrators. I can't stress that enough. That this is what they do. It is their main method of operation, and a race of people is not off limits to these scumbags. By 600 AD, the Khazars had control of both Christianity via Nicaea and the Muslims via infiltration and then destabilization, resulting in a civil war, leaving from their grasp only Judaism, the final piece of the puzzle. By interbreeding and growing, and then by outright conversion of the empire into Judaism, it allows these snakes to slither their way into the final religious holdout. Understand, folks, that these people, while claiming Jewish heritage, are no more of a Jew than Louis Farrakhan is a Jew. In fact, according to some Israeli scholars, along with others, the Khazars share no genealogy or heritage or even culture with any of the true Jewish people. They are mostly Turks, Turks and Europeans, Turks and Slavs, etc. Maybe some interbreeding with the Ashkenazis, but mostly with the local European populations. And so now we can see how a whole religion, a whole race of people can be co-opted, infiltrated, even taken over. From Zelensky to Soros, from Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, the energy mogul and founder of the Azov unit, to Viktor Pinchuk, the Ukrainian steel and media oligarch, all these players claiming a Jewish heritage while actively oppressing real Jews of the world. We could even extrapolate this scenario onto Israel and what's going on there to this very day. Israel Jews have been guinea pigs. Netanyahu said so himself. He called Israel a lab. They've had their world flipped upside down ever since World War II, being used for a greater purpose, including even today, as Israel is the most vaccinated country per capita in the world of the experimental mRNA shots. The main supposed Jewish leaders of the day don't give a damn about the real Jews, clearly. So it's important for everyone to understand that it's not a whole race of people that are in on this. In fact, it's an atheist group, a pagan group that merely calls themselves Jews, effectively taking control of a whole race, continuing the confusion and division and finger pointing while never pointing the finger at those in control, though. Chapter 15, More Khazaria and Conclusion. We've just dipped our toes into the Khazars and their history, but their story is much more confusing and complicated. We know that they, based on the research of many historians and scholars, are primarily of Turkish blood, some mixed with some Ashkenazi blood, but most likely Turks, and Central and Eastern European blood. We found that they first made their appearance around the 500s in the central steppes of Europe, just in time to weaken, destabilize, and then finally bring the Western Roman Empire to its knees. Why the West and not the East? The Western Roman Empire encompassed all of Central and some of Eastern Europe, with its main power center being the exact place where the Ashkenazis congregated after the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Understanding through my research that these demons have been in control of things for a few thousand years means that they did not just pop up one day in Ukraine and say, "Hello, everyone, we are the Khazars and we're controlling everything." What happened in the 500s was a few things. As we know, everything these people do have multiple beneficial purposes with regard to their overall agenda, their great work. And so was the case with this psyop. The biggest and main strategy behind the creation of the Khazars was to first establish a new race of peoples and to carve out a portion of land in order to have their own nation. Second was in order to co-opt the third and final major religion of the world that was not yet under their control, Judaism, as they did around 750 AD. The third thing that it did that doesn't get spoken about much is that the establishment of the Khazars seems to be directly related to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, as spoken about moments ago. It appears as though the Khazar Turks began their infiltration into the Roman Empire in the mid to late 300s in Central and Eastern Europe, right around the same time Emperor Constantine consolidated the empire and Christianity, which seemed to have created a power vacuum within the empire, causing the destabilization that would eventually lead to its downfall. About 100 years after this chaos in the Western Roman Empire began, we see the Khazars claim themselves into being in the central steppes of Europe, just north of the main power center of the Western Roman Empire and ever so close to the coup de grace, Rome. And we should stop right here. This is confusing because in every piece of info I've ever put out with regard to these people in this subject, I claim that these controllers have been in control for thousands of years. Part of a secret brotherhood going back in time just as far, called the Brotherhood of the Snake, passing down secret knowledge, probably some knowledge that helps them maintain their control over this planet, passing this knowledge down to their descendants in order for them to continue to carry out what they call the Great Work. We've went into great detail on these people and how they were able to take over Christianity using their agent Constantine and morph the Roman Empire and Christianity, thus taking control of the hearts and minds and laws of most of what they called the civilized world at the time. So the Khazars don't seem to make a lot of sense just showing up in the 500s, thousands of years after the snakes had already taken control of this planet. The Khazars are the controllers finally being able to bring their bloodline out into the open. But not just that. As stated, everything they do has multiple objectives, and we've already noted that this gives them their own civilization, not like the Roman Empire, where they have to act Roman and thus Christian and conduct their evil via deception. This new Khazar Empire can choose a different religion to infiltrate. Follow. The only one not yet controlled in Judaism, as noted earlier. But it's important to understand. So now these Turkish/Slavs began their narrative of being a bunch of poor, pious, displaced Jewish refugees with nowhere really to go, especially after the Khazarian civilization disappears around 1100, with the last holdouts being centralized in what is modern-day Ukraine. It was at this time, the time of their disappearance, that these snakes spread out throughout all of Europe, infiltrating the kingdoms and even the kingships. And this is literally documented when one takes the time to follow each of these various lines back, weaving in and out of the marriages and the name changes, etc. Just look at this time at who was holding the power in the years following the Khazarian disappearance. The Turks, with their Ottoman Empire. And while there were kings and queens in Western Europe at this time, also, but the real power was with the Austrian-Hungarians and the Bosnian Serbs, the Central and Eastern Europeans, the Slavs. And there is your Turkish, Slavic Khazarians. Heck, we see it all the way up to World War I with the assassin-killing Archduke Ferdinand being a Serbian Khazar. And then we might as well go right into the Bolshevik Revolution being planned, organized, financed, and carried out by Khazarian Jews. Literally almost all of them. I suppose just moving chronologically, we see them all over the place behind World War II, and from my research, Hitler was a Khazarian Jew. In fact, the Khazars are behind the rise of the Nazis, and many closet Nazis today are Khazars. As spoken about before, even today we can see them literally all over the main geopolitical events. The president of Ukraine is one. The guy who financed him is one. The guy behind Uranium One is one. The guy who owns the energy infrastructure in Ukraine and employed Hunter Biden is one. The guy who funds a Nazi military battalion in the Ukraine armed forces is one. The guy who uses his billions to fund NGOs that destabilize countries and cause color revolutions named George Soros is one. The face behind Facebook is one. Klaus Schwab, face of the WEF, is one. I even contend that Henry Kissinger is one. If you'd like to go back in time again during their infiltration of Christianity, we see them infiltrating the very powerful order known as the Jesuits, who then become the main force that instigates the U.S. into the Civil War. Of course, prior to this, in 1714, the British crown was snatched by the Khazar Germans, and a few decades later, a bunch of farmers and blacksmiths in America went to war with these scumbags, one that still rages onward today. As we can see, these people, if we can call them this, are not Jewish. They have, just as they've done to governments and institutions for millennia, they have infiltrated and taken over a whole race and religion all in one swoop. They are the descendants of a much more ancient order known as the Brotherhood of the Snake, from ancient Babylon, who worship the devil, Lucifer, and who have been able to leverage and maintain control over the majority of this earth. And I have written extensively about these demons. I contend that it began with a flood that wiped out almost all of civilization, and I believe that there was a group that was able to maintain this knowledge from prior to the flood, or a group that somehow rediscovered this knowledge after the waters subsided and was able to use this knowledge in order to take control over the pockets of survivors as the world started to regroup. Once in control, They use this control to consolidate control further while also creating more mechanisms for their control. Anytime something good and organic occurred, they would be quick to infiltrate it and steer it their way. Understanding the human psyche, and with an inordinate amount of control, they would keep humanity trapped in these slavery cycles. Once one begins to fail or the people start figuring it out, they crash it and resurrect a new one, just as insidious as the last. At first, they took control with brute force and outright enslaved the people. Then, as populations grew and people organized, they assumed control over you because God told them to. Then they enslaved you. After democracy hits the scene in a big way in 1776 and exposes the divine right to rule scam of the monarchs, they start new ideologies like communism, written by a Khazar supposed Jew, Karl Marx. And then they enslave the people that way. Then they set up world bodies like the UN or the WHO, or when an emergency hits, and when an emergency hits, even a manufactured one, they would put the world under the authority of a global body with lockdowns and mandates, and they would enslave the people that way. Currently, as the Khazarian controllers have been telling us, they are tricking the citizens of the world into fusing their biological bodies with new digital technology, ran by a controller-programmed AI system that will track all of your movements, and with a digital currency that documents every single transaction in the cloud, tracking everything you buy or sell. And then, dear listeners, they will have gotten the people to enslave themselves. The basis for our confusion addendum. The main objective of this book was two-pronged. First, to tell a historically accurate story that shows a group of people in control and maintaining this control over the world and what their goals are, citing the many mechanisms used like psyops, lawfare, infofare, along with the institutions they've set up and infiltrated to help further their goals, like the Vatican or many world governments, while pointing out those of who are perpetrating such actions. The second goal for this book was to do this in a way that could be very easily digestible for normies, or those still stuck in the controllers and the MSM trance, as those are the people we need the most right now. And this is something that nobody has really yet been able to do. You see, this subject is extraordinarily complex and sprawls out throughout numerous civilizations and thus languages and dialects, creating the need when searching this subject to have to not only understand the timelines of the various civilizations going back even further than the beginning of mankind's written history, but to have to also have a slight understanding of the different languages and translations and meanings. It's just so much information, and it seems to spiderweb, becoming a mucky glob. Putting it all together for someone brand new to this subject is a monumental task. Understanding also that it had to be done in a way that isn't too basic for someone who is well versed on this subject, as this book is intended to be thought-provoking and beneficial to all readers and listeners, no matter the competency levels with regard to this subject, and with everyone learning some new things. The plan was to put forth about a half a dozen core facts about the subject, like the fact that these people exist and have existed for thousands of years, and then presenting about a dozen facts that support that concept. For the more experienced with regard to this subject, this may come across as somewhat redundant. And for the lesser experienced readers, they will have to accept facts presented to them without those facts being backed up for them. Having to do such would drag this out for days, and the whole book would be primarily nothing but nuances in different civilizations and linguistic translations. And so those folks have to take my word for many of these things. I thought that this could be a happy median where all readers and listeners could enjoy this, and I do believe that this is a great resource for someone who is just beginning to awaken to the hell that we are facing. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please share it, especially with someone who is just starting to wake up. Thank you.